I'm going to have to make another request because we are really on a very tight time schedule that you hold your applause until the end of the presentations. Remember, we want enough time to have your questions so that you can find answers or hear answers from the panel. So the two rules now are no outlandish noises and hisses and things like that. That's rude. And two, please just hold your applause so that we will have the time to really fully explore these issues. Thank you.
So I was invited to help provide some context for the environmental and ecological values of Golden Gate Park and why many in the environmental community are concerned about what we see in the western end in particular as a kind of industrialization and a change. And I think as I talk tonight, when I'm speaking specifically about Golden Gate Park, it really is sort of emblematic of what many of us are concerned about how the parks are treated in general in San Francisco. So in providing this context, I want to let you know a little bit of where I'm coming at this from, or the Audubon Society and many other groups are. And it's a little melodramatic, so you'll have to pardon, but it's very relevant, and I hope you can understand that. We always hear about how we're losing biodiversity, and we read about it, and it's the ice is melting in Antarctica, and the trees are getting cut down in Brazil. But the fact is that we're losing biodiversity in the world, and we're losing it in San Francisco. Rec Park's website acknowledges this in many places. And the reason we're losing that is we're losing habitat, and we're losing the stewardship, a value of stewardship on how to maintain what's left in the face of growing population pressure, something Mark pointed out, and that will become even more immense as time goes by. So in the end, conservation is not about just worrying about the penguins in Antarctica. It's about what we do in our own yards, in our own parks, in our cities. And it's on us, and it becomes a factor of the kind of communities that we are. So when we begin to get up in arms about what we see as the industrialization of Golden Gate Park, and that's really what this is, at least at the western end, we have a soccer field project which is the ecological equivalent of a 7-acre parking lot. If they were to go out and pave it and lay down asphalt, ecologically, that would be the same thing. So we have to understand that as a loss of habitat and be realistic about it. Now, there are other values that people are getting out of it, and I acknowledge that. But ecologically, it's like a parking lot. And we will be adding an immense amount of traffic, 3 to 4 times the amount of usage, as Mark pointed out. That brings a lot more people and a lot more disturbance to the surrounding area, and the addition of the lights, which I'll get to in a little bit. The wastewater treatment plant sort of expands this industrial footprint at the western end. Now, we're particularly concerned about this because the western end of Golden Gate Park has always been designated to be more wild and more natural. While the park itself was seen as a refuge, that was particularly true of the western end. It was supposed to be wooded and native. It was supposed to be for a place for people who could not get away to Yosemite, or even in the old days, get to the Marin Headlands or down to the peninsula. And it's part of San Francisco's wild space, and there's very little left. So it might be a different issue somewhat if this were occurring in a different park or a different part of the park. But here at the western end, it's one of the last wild places we have left. And because I'm an attorney and a former Reformed English major, I can't proceed without quoting someone else's authority to back up my own. Raymond Clary wrote in The Making of Golden Gate Park, "Each new generation and each new social trend places added pressure on the woodland park, originally designed to balance the effects of urban living. Each change serves to defeat the very purpose of the park. It was to serve as a quiet retreat, a natural environment. Although the setting aside of buildings for the specific setting aside of buildings for specific uses may be important to certain people or certain groups of people, in total, these changes destroy the woodland park." And it still is very much a woodland park and still is very ecologically relevant to San Francisco. When Golden Gate Audubon began as the Audubon Society of the Pacific in 1918, it began with people doing walks in Golden Gate Park. And they would count hundreds of California quail, as well as many other species. And they've been out there counting them for almost 100 years. People are still out there almost every day counting birds and counting other wildlife. And those, today, there are fewer than 8 quail left in the Golden Gate Park and in San Francisco altogether. And again, this is emblematic of our stewardship overall. So it's also an important place for migrating birds, and we know that lights have very significant negative effects. They bring in birds. They have negative effects on their predation. And so all these things are of great concern about how we're going to protect this part of the land. And we know, as I said, that this project will have significant impacts. Now, we know that Rec and Park can do good work. We see it in the Natural Areas Program. They have got a good reforestation program. There's been restoration at the buffalo paddock, and I think people like Gloria Koch-Gonzalez and others should be applauded for prioritizing that. But what we have not seen is an overall priority of protecting the land and stewarding it overall. And so, for example, in this project at the Beach Chalet, it was brought to us as this was a fait accompli. It was always going to be artificial turf. There was never any public discussion about alternatives for natural grass turf. And when we brought them up with Rec and Park staff, we were shot down. I think the wastewater treatment plant has at least been a more robust public discussion. And so one of the things that we've tried to stress again and again through this process is try to encourage people to read the master plan, to look at the ecology and look at our own responsibility as individuals for maintaining biodiversity locally and in our parks, and think about what are those values that we pass, not only through things like competitive sports and soccer, but how do we show our kids and our next generations how to respect the land that has been left to us by other generations. Thank you.
George Wooden.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank you, Jim. I want to thank the Commonwealth Club and my fellow panelists. I'm going to talk a little bit about budget tonight. The RPD has changed its financial model to become self-sustaining, and new changes in the financial policy have caused the RPD to privatize revenue generation above all other RPD services. As Mark had stated earlier today, over the last decade, the amount of money given to the RPD by San Francisco's general fund has been constantly reduced by the mayor's office. Long before the current budget crisis, San Francisco has decided to make the RPD a low financial priority and started allocating funds that were formerly budgeted for the RPD to other city departments. Now there's a new financial plan. The lower paid operational employees that provided services to the public, specifically the RPD's recreation directors, were fired. Reduced services that have been directly provided by RPD employees to the public. They continue to be reduced. Rent or lease park facilities to private businesses for their financial benefit. According to the city charter, section 16.107, extra RPD expenditure savings would be retained or kept within the RPD budget and dedicated to helping fund the parks in future years. This is very unusual. If you follow other city agencies, the RPD is the one, I believe, agency that keeps their money and carries it forward. In 2010, almost $10 million in RPD funds were taken away from the RPD and given back silently to the city general fund. The RPD's 2010 $12.4 million deficit could have been greatly reduced by almost $10 million had the city charter been enforced. So we have to think when they say they're going to be self-sustaining, part of being self-sustaining is that the city actually allows them to keep the money that they generate. At this time, no one knows how much in RPD savings are unacknowledged. So under the old RPD budget plan, financial donations would be accepted. The new budget plan, financial donations have now become a top priority, or top budget priority. The existing RPD administration has been converted into a sales force by a new informal salary multiplier program that requests that employees generate between 5 to 10 times their existing salary. The children's services budget has been cut by 13.4%, and the RPD's planning and privatization budget has been increased by 633%. 13 new administrative employees were hired in 2010 that make over $100,000 per year, not including a 33% benefit package. The opinions of donors who make philanthropic contributions have become much more important than public opinion to the RPD. It's where they get their money. Park planning has become oriented towards philanthropic money. Examples of the new self-sustaining revenue plan in action. Permit fees have been increased, and this has led to the canceling of events and less usages in some places. It actually generates less revenue. The Stowe Lake Boathouse contract was awarded to an out-of-town bidder that paid consultants that were recommended by RPD employees. The contract was awarded to the lowest bidder, not the highest. And the result is a lawsuit. The Arboretum started charging out-of-town visitors $7 entry fee and promised that this fee would generate a net revenue of at least $250,000 annually. Result, a 44% decrease in local attendance, a 70% decrease in out-of-town attendance. After 8 months, less than $60,000 had been earned, and the Botanical Society has had to pledge the balance of the $250,000 in annual net revenue from their own sources. The proposed soccer field complex will cost between $9 and $12 million. The EIR costs $400,000. Synthetic fields last 8 to 10 years and cost $400,000 to $600,000 to replace. The entire project could have been done for less than $1 million if grass were used. In fact, the last time this facility was refurbished as a grass field was in 1998. I'm going to be quick. The park needs of San Francisco, this is my own personal belief, the park needs of the San Francisco citizens who pay for the parks are now secondary to the RPD's attempts to generate more revenue from the parks. I don't blame them for wanting to make more money because of the current situation, but that's a hard reality. Golden Gate Park was supposed to be a place that the community, the taxpayers, support and preserve for the good of all. Golden Gate Park was never intended to be a self-sustaining or pay money into the city general fund. Once the city decided that the parks would have to be self-sustaining, the whole notion of public space has been destroyed. The new RPD staff now cares more about the money that it receives than the public need or sustaining the parks. Thank you.